Hi everyone, Jeff Lee, joined today by Director of Photography Jendra Jarnagin, who is a pioneer DP, did a lot of work in the early days of the digital cinema, is known for her sort of trailblazing efforts in furthering the technology. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Jendra just came off of a independent feature film, which we'll talk about, but of course she also just did the first season of East New York, and very excited, I just found out today, is going to be season 4 DP of Emily in Paris. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, very excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, and I think where we should start is sort of your history of looking at early digital cinema cameras.
Early in my career, that was sort of a niche that I could grab onto to help distinguish me amongst other people in my field. I was one of the first people to shoot with the Viper, one of the first people to shoot with the F60, the Sony F65, several other cameras at the time that was like, oh, what's new, what's different, what are people interested in, what am I interested in, and finding, independent projects to be able to use those as, test projects, or I would just have a film of my own that I had landed as a DP, like a short film, for example, and say, oh, well, I could use this opportunity to get access to this very high-end camera, that the camera companies knew that I was someone that getting something in my hands early would benefit them in terms of my understanding of how to put it through the paces and the feedback that I could give them by having sort of a test project that they could be on the inside of it by supporting that project. So it was sort of a win-win. And so I sort of went with that, and in that process learned quite a lot about how digital cinema works, and image processing and image science and color science and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, and that's important too, naturally, since you understood the creative need as a DP, but then you also understood the technical sort of limitations or possibilities within the sort of infrastructure of the camera and how that color pipeline works. It certainly makes a lot of sense that when you approach a project as a DP, you need to look at it from both sides, and they're equally important. Although it may not be as obvious, from like what we see on the screen as an audience. So that's important too, because I know you just wrapped Nix, which is your most recent independent feature film, and for that you did a lot of testing on what the right camera was for the project. And can you talk a little bit about what the project was, and sort of how you came to the decision of using the cameras and make that decision that you did on the cameras that you ended up using?
Nix is an independent feature film. We shot during the strike, got a SAG interim agreement, and the writer, director, and producer and lead actress was Christina Klebe, who was a very established actor already. She was in the movie Halloween and was quite well known in the genre film space, and this was her feature film directorial debut.
That's nice.
She had directed shorts before, and she had gone to NYU Film School as a director. So she wrote this film. It's a very interesting film, which is what appealed to me and why I said yes to something that frankly had a pretty small budget. Is sort of a genre bending kind of film. So it's got the visuals of a psychological thriller, the performances of a relationship drama, and the sound design of a horror movie. So the story, which is based on true events, that Christina had an accident where she broke her back in real life.
Oh, wow.
So that experience and her healing journey through that experience, coinciding with her new relationship with her partner, having a fresh and exciting and being in the throes of early love while basically being incapacitated and in surviving a very serious injury, were what inspired the story. So in the film, her real life partner, who is also a professional actor, plays her partner in the film, which was a fun experience to have a real life couple playing the couple. Certainly made a lot of things easier in terms of their existing relationship and their performances. And Black Swan was one of our primary references in terms of seeing things through the main character's experience that you don't really know, like, is this real? Is this not real? So that led to a lot of really interesting visual opportunities for the film and for myself. And Christina had a very clear vision, that this film is very intimate and personal to her, and she's a very, very visual director. So her lookbook and her shot deck was very appealing to me creatively, especially, coming off a broadcast TV show that has a certain structure and expectation, and, the creativity of that versus like the creative freedom of doing an indie and getting to be really bold and stylized with the visuals was very appealing to me.
Right. And I know you mentioned that one of the early tests was to look at things like low light and of course other performance values. So you ended up on the Canon C500 Mark II. Can you say a little bit as to like what, through your testing, what really were the shining points? Like, okay, this is the right choice for this project.
Yeah, we were trying to decide, of course, like we all do, what camera should we use. And something that was interesting about this film is one of the primary locations was a townhouse. So we spent a lot of time in our prep going through, talking through the use of the locations and how would we stage certain scenes. And I'm thinking, like, how would we light things? And the upstairs bedroom in the house where a lot of scenes take place at night as she's convalescing and sort of trapped in her situation. There was amazing available light that was happening. It was a second floor, with lots of windows. So there's a street light across the street, which was doing good things, as opposed to like sometimes you have available light, especially when you're shooting low light, where you have to actually like block out all the light because you don't like what it's doing. Like what this street light was doing was like an amazing base level place to start. And then all the cars that would be driving by, on Midtown would cast all of these lights and colors and shadows, like all moving around the room in a way that we loved. That was like really great, and actually was written into the script and the story about some of the interplay of lighting. And I was like, this is, it would take a lot to recreate this ourselves, and here it is happening naturally. Like, let's use this. So I used my own hybrid still camera, my own, Fuji X-T5, and shot some available light tests, and, was finding, in order to really milk what's going on here, we need to be at extremely high ISOs, like, 12,800 or 6,400 to like take advantage of what's going on here. So I knew that, shooting with the 800 ISO camera would be a wasted opportunity for that, for scenes that were quite important in the movie. So I wanted to shoot with a higher ISO camera. And something that really interested me about the Canon, there are several cameras, of course, that have a dual gain ISO where you can shoot at either 800 or 1600 or 800 or 2500, and you have a choice that, whereas the Canon, you can choose several more ISOs. You can choose 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and each of those image processing pipelines are processing the image through that, ISO choice. So it's beyond a dual ISO. It's like a, 5-stop range of native ISOs. So I did my low light testing, and I found, 3200, no problem, like looks just as clean as anything else. 6400, you start to introduce some noise, but it's the character of the noise was very pleasing. Like it wasn't like, don't do that.
Right, it was like fixed pattern or anything like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think something that the Canon does is it fires the photosites randomly so that the pattern of the noise, frankly, it doesn't have a pattern. It's more like film grain, where, each single frame, it's more moving around, so you don't see it, and it just sort of blends in a soft way. So I did some tests, and how far can I push this ISO, and I found that the 64 cleaned up really, really, really nicely with very minor noise reduction that it would cut with other scenes, or if you didn't mind the look of the noise, you could totally go with that with the 6400. I didn't even bother shooting raw, because that was something that the camera can do. And there's a sort of view like, oh, you have a camera that can do this, go ahead and shoot what the best the camera can give you. But I'm very pragmatic, and this was a, small film, and to burn all of that extra data, like I didn't want to even have to do that. So I asked some colleagues and people who'd shot with this camera before, like how worth it is the raw? Like, does it buy me enough to warrant the trade-off of workflow and extra data and managing all that data, et cetera? And I decided up front, like, no. And I didn't even bother. I didn't even test the raw. I was like, I'm not even sure if I could find, maybe I can get I'm guessing here, half stop more out of shadow noise, floor noise or something, detail out of it. I'm like, I don't need that. It's not worth it. So I just went with the top choice of the internal native codec, and shot a lot of the movie at 6400.
And then I know, as far as camera choices too, I think some ergonomics tend to play into it. Not always a primary sort of conversation, but I think you mentioned
Sometimes
too.
it is.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Yeah.
For this one, it wasn't.
Right.
But, I mean, we did have some scenes in cars and mounted to cars, and I did have some handheld, and we did do a little bit of 2-camera shooting. So it was a factor to think about. I didn't want, a big, huge, heavy camera, but that was definitely a benefit, and something that I found pleasantly surprising. I, being the size of the crew that we had, I did operate the camera myself, and I brought my ergo rig and my easy rig, and I almost never used them. Like the first time out, I did handheld with the ergo rig, and I put it on, and I was like, I don't even need this. Like, this camera weighs nothing, especially with the primes, and it was very. We had a nice build on it, and it was very lightweight and balanced, and I found it very happily agreeable in terms of its compact size and all the versatility that goes along with that.
So speaking of lenses, that's kind of a perfect lead into my next question. I'm always really curious, speaking to DPs such as yourself, what that lens choice decision must look like. You get the script, you go maybe location scouting, you talk to the director and have all these conversations, but at some point you need to make the decision as to what lens will best fit the story, best fit the budget, all those things. So I'm curious how you arrived at the lens choices for NICS and what that testing looked like, because I know you did some testing, pretty extensive testing early on in the project too, to sort of land at where you did with the glass. So what did that look like?
Well, first factor in the lens choice was what size sensor did I want to work with, and I did consider, since the Alexa 35 is new and I haven't used it yet, and I'm interested in the camera, like, oh, could I use this project as an opportunity to get to learn a new camera, while I'm at it, kind of thing. And I gave it some thought, and in terms of the horror parts of the visual elements of this film, I was really interested in the larger format sensor that the C500 had, in terms of being able to do really shallow depth of field. Is not something that I'm usually interested in. If I'm shooting a drama or a comedy that, for what's sort of a naturalistic depth of field, when you're looking at people, I feel like I get enough out of that with the Super 35 sensor. But I knew that I wanted to do some, stylized, really push the shallow depth of field, as well as the wider field of view of some of the wider lenses on the larger sensor, and what that could do in terms of our, proximity to the actors and camera to subject distance with the larger field of view. So I started with that. Was like I had sort of like a little back and forth. It's like, well, if I shot Super 35, I'd have more options to choose from in terms of lensing. But what's more important to me? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna prioritize the larger sensor. And it's like, okay, so then what can cover, but also what has wide angle lens choices and has a wide enough variety of primes to cover the whole range. I knew I wanted, to shoot primes because specifically what I was saying, I wanted something fast for the shallow depth of field opportunities. So I'd always been interested in the Tribe 7 lenses and never had the opportunity to use them for anything. And I wondered if this would be a good project for those lenses. So I started with the sort of a practical examination of like, okay, what are the focal lengths? Are there enough of them? How fast are the lenses? And that was a good fit for us. I knew that I wanted wide angle lenses. So the Tribe set starts at a 20.7 and then a 23.7, a 27. So plenty of choices of wide angle lenses, and then goes all the way up to 137. And they're all, between a 1.8 or 1.9 and 2, depending on the individual lens. So I was like, okay, yes, this is a good range of lenses. So now let's go see what they look like. So educated myself about the different choices. Something that makes the Tribes unique is the ability to pick the different tunings. So as I educated myself about the different product lines of the Tribe 7 lenses, the S's, the T's, the X's, and I learned about another series called the B's. They have multi-coated optics, like the S's, but they have, I guess it's like the paint, the inside of lenses is painted black in order to prevent stray light from sort of bouncing around. And they, I don't know if they've removed that black or just designed it in a way that it's not black inside. So the effect of that, which on paper sounded really appealing to me, was that there's a lower contrast to the lens. So it's not that it makes more flaring. It's actually that the multi-coated optics reduce the flaring, but the lack of the black coating inside the lens reduces the contrast, which is something that I like. I like a softer black in my lenses. I don't usually like a sort of a harsh, strong, crispy look. I like I also shoot a lot of beauty, and what I think looks good on faces is sort of a softer tonality in the dark areas, especially if I'm going to be doing a movie that has a lot of darkness in it. I didn't want things to look harsh. I still wanted them to feel soft. And so that's something about the Tribe 7 lenses, and is that they were designed with sort of like a vintage design to them, but they're new and they're modern lenses. So they are, unlike other vintage lenses, which could be incredibly delicate or hard to find, or that there's a huge difference between one focal length and another focal length, whether that's, the size, the weight, the gear pitch, how you mount your motors could be like a complete rebuild based on some of the older vintage lenses. These were designed to be user-friendly, but have some of the imaging characteristics that we like out of the vintage lenses.
And modern coatings, which is important for that flare control that you talked about.
Yeah. Well, modern coatings in some of the product lines, the B's and the S's, but I think older style coatings in the Skins program, which is like an add-on thing that the Tribes can do that I did not explore for this purpose, and then I think that the T's and the X's are more modeled after older coating on purpose, to be able to give you a range of things that you can do with those lenses. So I settled on the B's, like I liked those the best in terms of having the imaging characteristics of an older lens, but the flare control of a more modern lens.
Thank you for that insight. It's really interesting to sort of hear what that process looks like. Certainly technical, of course, is a little component of the whole bigger picture that is a feature film in this case. But I am curious too what it was like, creatively as well, to work on Nix in terms of, and you mentioned you had a lot of creative freedoms, which is nice, and that's what kind of attracted you to the project. But just sort of like picking apart sort of those creative fun elements of Nix, like were there any sort of standout like opportunities that really jumped out at you that you want to share?
Yeah, we get to do some really bold visual sequences. The film overall is set in reality and has like a naturalistic base to it, but there are nightmare sequences and fantasy sort of like imaginings that get pretty wild. So we got to do some nightmare sequences where we used really wide lenses beyond the lenses that we were even talking about, like where we day played like a 15 millimeter, and then we did something with a Kawa anamorphic 40 on a expander mounted sideways.
Okay.
So that basically everything was getting really distorted intentionally, like her experience of sort of people looking at her and being sort of examined and under the microscope, so to speak. So yeah, the director had a lot of really great ideas that were very expressive. So that, and then we did some stuff with diopters and used a little bit of atmospheric haze and some filters. There's some new filters that Tiffin makes that I really like. The black fogs and the night fogs, which let you sort of temper your contrast range, like older fog filters that we knew from the film days are basically too blunt of an instrument now for digital. So they've come out with these, the two different ranges. The black fogs, when filters have the word black in it, what that means is that it's doing less to lift the shadows. So you might have halation or a contrast effect, but the black levels are sort of being grounded and trying not to, be lifted too much. So the black fogs are sort of a lighter touch, and then the night fogs are more, like dreamy and lifted. So I used a little bit of both of those as well. I lit the movie mostly with LED lights. Our entire movie was all aperture lights. All their entire product line from from their panel lights to their new Fresnel attachments to their Lico attachments. You name it, is pretty much an aperture project, with the exception of a couple of old-fashioned small tungsten Fresnels, because and what had me reach for those when I was putting my lighting package together was the use of shadows, that you get the best shadow quality out of a Fresnel. And the new LED lights that have a Fresnel, it's a Fresnel attachment that's quite large.
Correct.
And so I did some side-by-side tests and was actually quite happy with the shadow quality from the aperture Fresnel, but the lights that, and it's a modular thing, so it can go on a couple of different kinds of lights, but the lights that you would typically use it on, as well as the thing itself, makes for a pretty large thing. And sometimes we just wanted like an inky, like this far away from a person, to make that shadow. So I would hope that as LED lighting technology evolves, that we can get more like smaller Fresnel spotlight replacements, because that's sort of like the whole that we're missing. And of course LEDs are great environmentally and electrical usage, but also just being able to remote control everything and being able to dim things without the color temperature shift and using less gels and everything else.
Right.
Sort of like, please someone make some small Fresnel
It's a plea out there.
Yes.
So as far as the shadows, that's really interesting. Was a lot of the shadows done practically, or do you think some of that will be post? So all practical?
Yeah, we did. We really leaned into the idea of in-camera practical effects. There is also going to be some visual effects as well, and like there would be on any film that you are making in 2023 or 2024. But certain things about the film that were conceived and imagined that would be VFX, but then we also did a lot of things as practical effects and special effects with special effects makeup and and a combination thereof, where it was like, oh, this is an effect that's going to start with a physical thing without giving too much away, but then it's going to morph into something, bigger, or before your eyes, that you see something transform from something normal to something imagined. And how that transformation happens was a combination of practical effects and visual effects.
You also mentioned that the director had a lookbook that you referenced quite a bit. So what is that like, working with someone that has such a strong visual sort of sense and knowledge of what they want out of the movie, and then you translating it? That
was really exciting. That was one of the biggest benefits, I would say. A lot of people ask, who are interested in being a director, like, oh, I don't know that much about lenses or technical or whatever. Like I feel, or they're intimidated by the technology of the filmmaking. And what I've told people, along the way in terms of words of encouragement is you don't need to know that stuff. Like, that's what your DP is for. You just need to know what you want and how to communicate it. And have a vision, like having a director that doesn't even know what they want or isn't clear. I mean, you can't expect everybody to be totally clear all the time. Christina was.
Right.
Christina was. I mean, because it was, based on her life story, and she'd been trying to get a feature film made for so long. Like, she'd obviously given this a lot of thought and a lot of depth. So her vision was very, very clear and very consistent. So the more I got to know her and the more I got to see her references, the more I could tune in to what that was, because it wasn't all over the place. It was consistent and clear. It's like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get this person. And like, your goal as a DP with any director is to get to the point where you can complete each other's sentences, and what they want, and that you have their trust because they know that what they want. So that aspect to this project was a real joy, to have someone who was so visual, because a lot of she wrote the script herself. A lot of writers are not that visual, and a lot of actors are not that visual. You think, oh, it's a director with an acting background, they're going to be really strong on performances, but not necessarily on visuals. And then I've worked with plenty of directors like that. They're like, want me to do the shot list, or don't even really know how to approach the thought process about how to cover a scene. And Christina was the opposite, and she liked the idea of not doing standard coverage. With a few exceptions, like the movie has a visual arc to it, and in some ways starts out in a more, traditional classical style. And then as, the character's journey gets more, sort of fragmented and sort of cloudy, that we have somewhere to go with that. So that visual arc and a sort of getting clarity and establishing what that was early on, makes it a lot easier as you're shooting out a sequence. Like, where are we now on the curve of,
the visual story. Yeah. And it's such a personal story to her as well. So that was, was there a bit of a balance of like you not wanting to step on toes necessarily, or did you have such a good working relationship that it never became even contend with?
There was definitely, a sensitivity that came along with that, like a sensitivity in terms of this was born out of a traumatic experience that was a trauma that she has lived through. And I would say, that part of this film is part of that healing process of taking something incredibly challenging that you lived through and, transforming that into art and beauty and expression that you can share with the world is, But yeah, I mean, of course, like any working relationship, there's times where, the director very much wants the DP's input, or any given collaborator for that matter. Or there are times where they're like, no, I know exactly what I want. So it's interesting to sort of like balance that back and forth.
I mean, that's often the tricky part of balancing any working relationship, like you said, but certainly on a set where everyone is creative, unlike, let's say, an office environment where you may not have that many sort of left brain, right brain, sort of back and forth balances. Have there been moments in your career where you've just been like, I almost want to walk away from this because it's such a difficult struggle, or like, how do you navigate that? And, we get asked this quite a bit too. Same, I think, to you is, I'm a young DP. I'm a young director. I want to be a young writer. Like, what do I need to know? Like, what are the things that help me succeed and be in your seats in a couple of years? Like, so what are some of those struggles like, and what have you done to sort of get around them?
I think the important thing for DPs to understand is that this is a business of communication and a business of relationships. So yes, your artistic vision and your skills, etc., matter, but I think what matters more in terms of your effectiveness in your job and what leads to being successful in this career is your ability to communicate and your ability to manage your team, and your ability to lead. And it's not just, I heard Ellen Kuras say this like more than a decade ago, it's not just how you manage the people under you, it's also how you manage the people above you. And practicing your active listening, practicing swallowing your ego, practicing staying open, practicing seeing things from the other person's point of view, and like not getting stuck in flexibility is a huge skill to learn.
Right.
And manage. So and my husband is also a DP and also been in the industry for decades, and you know, something that we always talk about and share with one another as we go through various struggles is that you learn the most from the bad jobs. You learn the most from the experiences that don't go well, sort of like can give you the biggest lessons. So I think a lot of people are maybe afraid of those negative experiences, but you need to have those. Like, and when people think about like, oh, you grow through making mistakes, maybe they think about mistakes as like, oh, I chose the wrong filter, or I went too bold on the exposure, or whatever. I would say the more important learning is the mistakes that you make in your interpersonal relationships and communications, like, you know, like getting fired, and it's like, oh, what went wrong here? Like, where's the growth opportunity here? What can I learn from this? And how do I become a better DP next time as a result of like what challenging things I just needed to confront that like didn't work so well, kinds of things. So, you know, I encourage people to embrace those challenges as part of the experience, and to, you know, I describe being a DP as 1/3 technical, 1/3 creative, and 1/3 managerial. And I think a lot of people don't realize or don't give the effort to developing the managerial part of themselves as an equal weight to the other two factors. So, you know, reading leadership books, taking workshops, communication courses, like Local 600 offered like a nonviolent communication workshop a bunch of years ago, and which was really fantastic. Like learning how to express yourself in ways that don't put other people on the defensive. When I have the opportunity to talk about those kinds of, I guess, soft skills, if you will, I think that those are important for people to give their attention and focus and personal development to those aspects of their leadership and their career.
And that rings true for any sort of area of the business that you're in, regardless. You know, you read these stories about aviation disasters or near disasters, and a lot of the time, if it's not like a mechanical thing, it's often the communication
breakdown.
Yeah. It's either we don't understand each other, or we're having a problem and we're not clearly communicating what the next step should be in that line. And that's what leads to, again, in those situations, those are life or death, and thankfully we're not in that same boat, but it's exactly that. That's 100% the most important thing. You mentioned, of course, early on in your career, you sort of, what you maybe would attribute to as one of the factors that like really brought you into the spotlight a little bit was your camera testing knowledge, your ability to embrace the new and the change, and even you admitted that, you know, at first you're like, I would never shoot with the digital for my movie because it's not the right way to do it.
Good enough.
Yeah. And of course, you know, through that conversation, you were able to really, you know, test this and understand it. And is there anything that you would say, you know, in that early part of your career where you really embraced the change and moved on with it, that like moved you into the sort of the next level of your career, beyond just being well known for embracing the technology and the change?
Ironically, the answer to that question is me realizing that I had gone too far off the deep end of technical, and that I was neglecting my artistic development, that I kind of got caught up in the attention of, you know, you're known for this, so keep up your self-education and that, you know, the things that we do between jobs about like, where am I going to put my focus to continue to move myself forward? I was putting all of my eggs in the technical baskets of like, oh, this is what's getting me attention. Let me continue to go further and further in that direction. And I got to a point where I had been offered like several consulting gigs, like very high level, you know, don't want to name too many names, but like, several big company, big brand, like, oh, can we hire you as a technical consultant? And I was like, realizing like, if that is the way that they are viewing me, they're not hiring me to shoot their shows. They're thinking like, oh, you're a technologist. And it's like, I don't want to be a technologist. Like, my interest in this was always in the service of story and like what that could bring to the art form. I sort of realized like, oh, I've kind of gotten a little off base here. Like I am not putting my energy in the right place, or at least I've gone too far and I'm not well-rounding myself in terms of how people are seeing me, but also where I'm putting my energy. It's easy for you to look at where you are and where you want to go and identify the gap is like, oh, I don't know how to use this camera, or I don't know enough about lenses, or I need to strengthen my, knowledge of lighting. And you can identify that, and you can go out and seek that information and educate yourself about those things. I talked to a few people about it, and other like directors and producers who were successful, and like, and they said to me, we don't hire a DP because of how much they know about, for example, codecs or, bit depth or that kind of thing. We hire DP for their eye and their artistic vision and like what makes their worldview unique, and their vision. So put your energy there. It's a very, very individual, personal question, for everybody. And so I sort of started with like, well, what inspires me? Like, okay, travel and museums, different kind, like I would try to expose myself to as many different kinds of movies as possible, even if I didn't think I would like them, like, or especially things that I don't like, okay, what can I take from this, or what don't I like about this? And so I basically got to a point where I don't want to say abandoned, but I shifted focus from let me learn as much as I can about all this nerdy technical stuff to be like, why do I need to know that stuff? Right. And what do I want to do with that stuff? And who am I as an artist? And what do I want to say? And how do I become more clear on that for myself? And how do I develop those sides of myself more was very confronting and challenging for me, because I didn't know where to go or how to do it.
Nothing wrong with being overly technical, but to your point, if your goal is to do one thing and be a director of photography, it's always like about that creative, muscle, right? Because like any muscle, the less you use it, the weaker it gets. And speaking of creativity, like what do you draw inspiration from? You mentioned travel, you mentioned, museums and such. So do you have sort of any like specific like North Stars for you that you home in on when you think creatively?
I think the thing that is the most sort of like opens access to me for inspiration is travel, and especially street photography. So, interestingly enough, my photographic, like my personal still photographic process is a complete opposite of my work, my cinematography work. And what I mean by that is in my cinematography work, I very, very strongly value prep, and I want to spend time getting to know a story and the director's vision, and that process of like, how are you going to take the words on the page and interpret that into visuals? Like that to me is the most creative and rewarding part of the process, which is something I recognized when I was shooting documentaries, that was lacking for me in shooting documentaries, like being sort of reactive and in the moment and present, like that has a lot of excitement in it, in and of itself, but it's not why I want to be a cinematographer. Why I want to be a cinematographer is interpreting the storytelling from the words on the page to the visual language. In my still photography practice, I am completely the opposite. I don't ever do any still shoots that I plan or I conceptualize or I pre-production or I get equipment together or get crew together. It's just me. It's like spontaneous and free, and like it's like this direct channel of just like observation and reactivity. So I love the process of shooting travel photography and street photography and just roaming around aimlessly, and just what is catching my eye, what am I interested in, and like experiencing the world through that process. And ironically, I never look at the pictures. I've got tens of thousands of amazing travel photography trips from like 27 countries that I've never looked at.
Oh no, do you share them or post them anywhere, or just kind of keep them in?
The process of getting home, looking through them all, sorting through them, if I do want to do any color tweaking, because I don't want to put them out there if they're not, up to par as they could be, that sort of process ends up holding me back, where I never put the time into making it a priority to follow through on that. It's really about it's not about the result, it's about the process of shooting.
Right.
And I get so much enjoyment from the doing, and I bet I would get enjoyment of sharing the imagery, but I'm always just like a go doer, and I'm really bad about following through of like sitting at the computer and sorting through the images and picking the ones that I want to share and posting them.
So what did you do to keep busy during the strikes? I mean, was it more photography or?
When the strike happened, I had just come off a 10-month TV show, and it was the first time in my life that I was ever employed as a DP for 10 months. So I was offered several projects right afterwards, like features, and I was like, no. I was committed to not working for 3 to 4 months on purpose. Like I have sacrificed everything in my life for the greater part of a year to go do this project. I have life to live that I need to go spend some time living. So travel, hanging out with my husband, seeing my family. I think I went on like 3 different trips, like all knowing that the strike was probably coming. I was like, I don't care. I'm going to spend this money and, go on a cruise and go skiing and go live in, rent a house in LA for a month. And then when this film came my way, this film Nix, I was actually quite surprised. I wasn't expecting to get, there were so few projects happening during the strike that, to have one pop up that was interested in me and offered me the job. I was like, oh, a movie. Oh, a little movie. Okay.
Yeah. So what's next? I mean, we of course know that season 4 of Emily in Paris, and how did that come about? And,
I had gotten a few calls for other TV shows. My show East New York was not renewed, and I got a few calls for other shows that were other network police procedurals, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that next. I want to try something different. I don't want to sort of start my TV career journey, being known for, the network police procedural genre is not very me. East New York was a very different kind of show in terms of the content and even to some degree the structure of it. But like if you didn't know that, you could easily put me in a police procedural box. Like that's not a box that it appeals to my personal artistic expression. So I was ready to hold out for let's see. I had been told for a while, like once you get that first TV show, which was a very hard nut to crack. I'd been trying for years and interviewing for years and making it to the final like 2 or 3 candidates, and came pretty close on a few shows. But getting that first one was really, really, really hard and took a really long time. And I was hopeful of what I had been told from colleagues, like once you get that first one, that doors will open. Now you're not taking a chance on you anymore. You have proven yourself, and so I was hoping that I would get another TV show once the strike ended, and enjoyed shooting TV and wanted to do more TV. So they were interested in me, and I interviewed and booked the job. So I know the other DP that was there last year. Seamus Tierney is someone that I've known for over 20 years. We used to be gaffers and electricians together in like the mid-90s. So he shot some of last year's, he was alternating DP last year, and then he'll be continuing on this year. So it's comforting to know that I have someone, walking into an existing show that already has their crew and already has an established look and their way of doing things, to sort of show up as the outsider is intimidating. So having someone else who's been there already to sort of shepherd me through that process. And of course, having that be someone I know already,
Right.
takes a lot of the intimidation out of basically that. I feel good that I have someone who has a vested interest in setting me up for success to come in. Like, here's what you need to know about how we do things around here. So very excited.
Yeah, congratulations. That's amazing to hear. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
Jendra, thank you so much. That was so much fun talking to you, and I learned a ton from you, and it was really enjoyable. So thank you so much again for coming in today. and
Thank
talking to
you.
us, of
Thanks
course.
a lot.
Well, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again for Jendra. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.